overview. Most of you are probably familiar with the California Advanced Homes Program and have participated. If you're not familiar, the program provides incentives for energy efficient single-family new construction. And the ultimate goal of the program is to prepare homes for the 2020 zero net energy goals. So by 2020, the goal is that 100% of new homes would reach zero net energy. And as I mentioned before, incentives are available through PG&E, and the program is funded under the auspices of the CPUC. I should also say this program, or this webinar also applies to multifamily, so we'll be talking a little bit about requirements for multifamily, even though this particular webinar is run through the California Advanced Homes Program. Next slide. Okay, so we're going to lead off this webinar just to gauge how you've worked with the program before, if you have, and kind of what your role has been, and that'll help us to kind of determine the angle that we take in explaining these updates. So I think we're ready to launch the poll. So the question is, in what way are you involved with the California Advanced Homes Program? So select one if you're a builder or if you're an energy consultant or HERS rater, if you are a builder or developer, if you work at a utility or with a government agency, or if you're an architect, engineer, or designer. I'm sure there's other ways that you could be involved with the program, but those are kind of the main groups. So I'll give folks a few moments to answer that poll, and then we'll begin our presentation. Okay, I think we're ready to close it out, and hopefully you can all see the results. So we have a lot of energy consultants and raters and builders on the call, with a few architects and a few utility and government folks. So thanks for answering that, and I think we're ready to introduce our panelists. So here's our agenda for today. We're focusing the beginning of our discussion on what is exactly changing, what is the transition to the 2016 standards going to look like, and we'll go into more detail on that change, those changes, and then how you can start thinking, if you're at that point, start thinking beyond the code, and then we'll also be talking about how these changes, how you can start preparing for these changes now by leveraging incentives through the California Advanced Homes Program. So our first panelist doing kind of sections 1, 2, and 3 is David Douglass-Jaimes, who is a TRC colleague. TRC runs the program on behalf of California Advanced Homes Program, or on behalf of Pacific Gas and Electric Company. David contributed to the code enhancement studies that informed the 2016 standards. So he is our in-house lighting expert, and I will hand it over to him to carry you through the presentation.
Excellent. Thanks, Shannon. Yeah, so we wanted to sort of give everybody a little bit of an in-depth discussion today about the lighting standards that are going into effect with the next code, so that everybody is prepared for them. And whenever I talk about the energy efficiency standards, I always like to give a little bit of background, because sometimes it can be a little confusing why we have these standards and why they're updated so frequently and why they keep changing. And to put it very simply, the state law requires that the standards are updated on a relatively regular basis. And there's a lot of sort of factors that go into those updates, but one of the most important pieces is that all measures in the standards must be cost effective. But this is not sort of the same kind of cost effectiveness that you would think of from a customer perspective or from a builder perspective. This cost effectiveness is based on the cost of energy production to the utilities, not necessarily what the ratepayers or your customers are paying for their electricity or their gas. And also, when we're dealing with most residential measures, it assumes that each measure has a 30-year lifespan. And that's a little bit tricky with lighting, because obviously you'll have to change light bulbs and stuff like that. But that's sort of the lifespan that the measures are required to be cost effective over. And the way that residential lighting works in the code, they're called mandatory requirements, but as we'll see, it's not really, mandatory is a little bit of a strong word for the way that the residential lighting requirements work. And because we know that the residential lighting requirements have gotten pretty complicated over the last few cycles, the more recent code change efforts have really focused on trying to simplify the standards and make them a little bit easier for builders and designers. So hopefully that comes through here, that the next cycle will be a little bit more simplified than the previous versions. And just before we get started, really, I always want to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of terminology. Just to be consistent with the language that's actually in the standards, I'm going to use the term lamp, which is usually what people call a light bulb, and luminaire instead of what is sometimes referred to as a fixture. And again, this is just what is the language that is used in the standards themselves. And of course, before we dig too deep into the 2016 standards, just to sort of recap, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with the current 2013 residential lighting standards, we have a lot of space-specific requirements that require you to really think out different lighting strategies for different rooms. In kitchens, you have to count watts for high efficacy versus low efficacy. Cabinet lighting is its own sort of crazy wattage calculation, and then bathrooms, garages, laundry rooms, utility rooms, and then all the other spaces all have separate requirements. And vacancy sensors are required in some spaces, and dimmers or vacancy sensors are required anytime that there is a low efficacy luminaire. So it's a lot of different overlapping requirements that can get a little tricky at times. So I think we're going to pause real quick for a poll.
Great, and I can read that out, David. So the question is, are you familiar with the 2016 Title 24 lighting requirements? Answers are yes. All/most of our homes take the CAHP lighting credit. And if you maybe don't work with CAHP, but you're really familiar, you can still choose that option. Somewhat, I'm aware of some of the changes, or no, that's why I'm attending this webinar. So we'll give folks a few moments to respond. And before we post the responses, so we can close it, and then David, I'll have you guess what you think people responded.
I'm going to assume that most people are maybe a little bit familiar, but not very familiar with the new standards.
Yeah, so let's post the results, and I don't think you can see them, David, so I'll read them to you. So we actually had a majority of folks saying, no, that's why I'm attending this webinar, which is really great. That, we're going into a lot of detail, so hopefully you'll feel more comfortable after this. We have 41% saying somewhat aware and 6% saying yes, almost all or most of our homes take the CAHP lighting credit. So we can keep going. Thanks.
Excellent.
Thanks, everyone.
Well, hopefully that means that the information that we present here will be really useful for everyone. So just a quick sort of overview of the 2016 standards. Like I said, the main approach was really reducing complication and, as a sort of almost unintended consequence, adding more choice back into residential lighting. The new standards really allow a lot more flexibility in luminaire choices. The requirements are more uniform across the home or across the residential unit. Much less room-by-room requirements and no more wattage counts anywhere in the house. And this is really achieved by what we're calling this all high-efficacy requirement, which allows some screw-based sources, again, which were not previously allowed to be considered high efficacy, as well as some simplified control requirements. And all of these changes, despite it being called the 2016 standards, will be going into effect January 1st, 2017. So this is just an overview of some of the topics that we'll be covering. Like I said, the all high efficacy requirement, some of the details of the performance requirements in Joint Appendix 8, some special requirements for downlights, as well as controls outdoor, and we'll touch briefly on some multifamily requirements. So first things first, the big piece of the 2016 standards is this all high efficacy requirement. So basically, all permanently installed luminaires must be high efficacy as defined in the standards. And the big change here in what is considered high efficacy is that screw-based luminaires and really any other type of luminaire that has a JA8 compliant lamp is now considered high efficacy. So in addition to the sources that were always considered high efficacy in the standards, which is sort of on the left side of this table here, there's an additional new sort of allowance, I would say, that allows any screw-based luminaire to be considered high efficacy if it is installed at the time of construction with JA8 lamps. There are, like I said, a couple extra requirements for downlights, which we'll go into. But this is really the key feature of the new standards. So again, typical sources that are always considered high efficacy: near fluorescent, pin-based compact fluorescent, including GU24, which you may be familiar with, any HID sources or induction sources, which are probably pretty uncommon in residential. But then any other luminaire type has to meet the Joint Appendix 8 requirements, which are a set of performance requirements that have been established in the standards. And so this can apply to LED luminaires, so any sort of fixture that has the LED light source built into it, or luminaires with removable LED lamps, screw-base or pin-base like MR16, and really any other type of luminaire not listed as already defined as high efficacy. So really what we were trying to do here was accommodate any type of new technology that might come in the future. Some of you may be familiar with or have heard of things like OLEDs or other types of light sources that might be coming down into the residential market in the future. And what we try to do is set up a set of performance requirements that can accommodate those types of fixtures in the future. And so those performance requirements, it's more than just efficacy. So one piece is really about how much light you get out for the amount of energy. And for these Joint Appendix 8 requirements, that is 45 lumens per watt. But it's also a series of quality and sort of color quality requirements. So it needs to have a color rendering index of at least 90 out of 100, and then color temperature of 3000 Kelvin for most sources, or LEDs or luminaires with built-in LEDs, and any GU24 LED lamps could be up to 4000 Kelvin. And all of these sources need to be dimmable to at least 10%. And so really what we were trying to do here is match the performance requirements of incandescent, what most residential consumers are familiar with and what they like, as well as providing the high efficiency light sources. There are some other factors that are in JA8, things like power factor and start time and requirements for reduced flicker and not making any noise, that kind of stuff. But I didn't include those here because those are much more technical. So in addition to applying to luminaires, this can apply to lamps that can be installed in screw-based luminaires, but the lamps must be marked. And you'll see here the marking, it'll say JA8 2016 or JA8 2016E. And any fully enclosed luminaires must use that E labeled lamp because of the extra heat in fully enclosed luminaires. So it needs to be a lamp that's designed to accommodate the heat in enclosed luminaires. And again, this standard is at the moment primarily used for LED, but it could be applied to any type of light source as long as it can meet the requirements. And as I mentioned, there are some additional requirements for downlights. So if you are installing recessed downlights, obviously they must be high efficacy. They cannot have screw-based sockets. So the new standards don't allow for screw-based recessed downlights. And they have to have a JA8 compliant source. So you have a couple options here that would be the pretty standard solutions for this, either an integral LED downlight package like what you're seeing here on the top image, or you could also use some sort of a pin-based downlight with a JA8 compliant source like an LED MR16. And the reasoning for this, there's multiple factors that go into this. Part of it is the heat buildup within recessed downlights that we want to try and avoid by using either these integral LED downlights or smaller sources. But also it really ensures that we're getting the maximum efficiency out of downlights rather than putting some sort of standard A-lamp type LED bulb inside a screw-based downlight where most of the light is lost inside the downlight package. This is really making sure that all of the light from your downlight gets out into the space where it's needed. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the other things that we really wanted to do is sort of simplify the control requirements. There's still a few pieces within these control requirements that we have to deal with, but we've tried to sort of unify them into fewer categories. So now instead of having separate control requirements for bathrooms, we've made the control requirements for bathrooms, garages, laundry rooms, and utility rooms all the same. So at least one luminaire in each of these spaces must be controlled by a vacancy sensor. You can always have an additional luminaire that's not controlled by a vacancy sensor if you want, but at least one must be controlled by a vacancy sensor. And then any JA8 luminaire or lamp, so these are going to be your LED luminaires or screw-based luminaires with LED lamps in them, must be controlled by a dimmer or a vacancy sensor. And then anytime you have dimmers that you're using with LED light sources or any really JA8 light source, it needs to comply, the dimmer itself is going to need to comply with a standard called NEMA SSL 7A. And basically that just ensures that the dimmer will work properly with your LED source. It doesn't really have anything to do with efficiency, it's just about making sure that the dimming is functioning properly, because otherwise you're not going to get the right kind of control. So briefly touching on some outdoor lighting requirements. Again, all of the luminaires must be high efficacy, and with outdoor, there's a slightly different control requirement. First, they must have the capability of being controlled by an on-off switch and one of the options listed here, so either photocell and motion sensor, or photocell and automatic time switch control, or an astronomical time clock or energy management control system with these types of functions. So this is just making sure that your outdoor lights aren't being left on during the day, and especially that they're coming on if you need them when there are people around who might need to be seeing. What we found in some of our research developing the standards was that outdoor lighting has some of the highest hours of use of any residential lighting, which makes sense when you think that you want to have your outdoor lights on in the evening hours when it's dark outside. But this is really, the control requirements here really help to make sure that we're not using our outdoor lighting when it's not needed. And then to briefly touch on multifamily requirements, the interior lighting for in the units must meet the same requirements that we discussed earlier, all the same high efficacy requirements. And then for low-rise multifamily common areas, so your hallways, any laundry rooms, etc., if less than 20% of your building area is those common areas, you have to still meet the same residential requirements. So everything with the high efficacy light sources. But if the common area is greater than 20% of your building area, it must meet the non-residential requirements. So it's a whole separate set of requirements for those common areas. And then in any high-rise multifamily common areas, those have to meet the non-residential lighting requirements. There's not an option on that one. And then looking at outdoor for multifamily, for patios, entrances, balconies, anything that's controlled from inside the unit meets residential requirements. And then it gets a little confusing with some of these in terms of the parking lots. If you have parking lots or carports for less than 8 cars, you can choose between either the residential or the non-residential, but anything for more than 8 cars, or 8 or more cars, must meet the non-residential requirements, as well as parking garages with 8 or more vehicles. And this table is taken straight from the lighting compliance manual, the residential lighting compliance manual, and there's a link to that later in the presentation. So a lot of these resources you can find there. The compliance manuals are a great way to sort of get a more layman's description of the standards than what you would find just in the code language itself. And then again, for high-rise multifamily, all outdoor lighting must meet the non-residential requirements. So I went through all of that fairly quickly, but we have one more poll based on this sort of quick intro to all of those standards.
Great, thanks, David. So I'll read the poll out. I'll give everyone a chance to read the question. So what is the best part about switching to the new lighting standard? So I wanted to take a positive turn, so I'll read those out. No need to count watts. Screw-based lamps are permissible. Greater energy savings, which then pass on to your residents, most likely. More fixture options, and eliminating dependence on GU24. So we'll give folks a moment to answer those. Okay, and then of course I'll ask David to guess what he thinks people chose, so we can wrap up the poll. And what do you think, David?
I think a lot of people are going to be really excited about the option to use screw-based luminaires. So the added choice of having those luminaires, I think, is going to be really popular.
Interesting. So that actually wasn't the most popular option. And with this question, I think it probably depends a lot on if you are an energy consultant or a builder/developer, kind of what conveniences matter more to you. But the most popular option was actually more fixture options, followed by no need to count watts. Yeah. And then the screw-based lamps and greater energy savings tied for third place. And then last was eliminating dependence on GU24, which maybe not everyone is familiar with. So yeah. That gives us...
I'm just glad that energy savings was not last place.
Yeah, right. So thanks for answering the poll question. And I think our next slide is a question slide, or maybe we can just pause for questions. I actually haven't seen any questions come in yet, so if you want to we're taking a break before we talk about the next wave of things that you can do beyond just meeting code. Feel free to enter questions. I know David covered a lot of material there. I think
since
really
we went
well
through
too.
really quick, if anyone has questions, feel free to type those in. I'm happy to sort of discuss further.
Give folks. Actually, David, I have a question kind of while we're waiting for questions to come in, which is just we talked about the different all the different kind of regulations that come into effect with, the controls have to be compatible with the lamps and such. Do you have a good kind of point we can direct folks to make sure they're finding equipment that meets those specifications, just kind of like a hub for locating that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely going to be, I'm hoping, as these standards get closer, there's going to be a lot of resources out there. The Energy Commission maintains some databases of the compliant products, but another resource that people can use and look to is the CLTC, the California Lighting Technology Center. They tend to provide a lot of really great resources to help people address some of these and comply with the standards. So that's a great resource to look to. And then again, I'll have some links later on in the presentation to things like the compliance manuals, which are another really helpful resource to explain all the standards in a way that'll be more understandable and I think a little bit more readily accessible for people trying to apply them in their day-to-day work.
Great, thank you. And I have a few questions that have come in while we were chatting.
Great.
So one of them, I think we'll just answer quickly, but it's more geared towards existing homes, which isn't our primary focus today. Do any of these requirements also impact like home retrofits?
Yeah. So anytime that you're doing a permitted renovation or addition to your house, all of the standards will still apply. Obviously, you won't have to go back and change the lighting in areas that are not being affected by the retrofits or the renovations, but anytime that you're doing major changes to the lighting in your home, it does need to meet these standards.
Great. And we have one more question. So that's about color quality. So have you, I guess, can you speak to the quality of the color? We mentioned the CRI. What is that? Is that intended to be most similar to an incandescent?
Right. Yeah. So there were two. Let's go back to that slide so that we can all be on the same page. There are two color-specific requirements in JA8. The first is color rendering index, and so that's how well the light, how well the colors appear in the light, how well the light renders those colors. And obviously, CRI is it's not a perfect metric, but what we want to do is make sure that the lighting that people are putting in is able to render colors the way that they expect to see them, from similar to incandescent light or daylight, as close as possible. Obviously, LED sources aren't going to be perfect, but with getting 90 CRI, it's sort of as close as we can get. And there are some efficiency trade-offs to that, because that's something that we hear a lot. 85 CRI lamps are a little bit more efficient, or 80 CRI lamps might be more efficient. But one of the key features here is that we want homeowners to really, we want them to like the light that goes in their house, and we think that the higher the color rendering, the higher probability that those light bulbs aren't going to get changed out for something that's perhaps less efficient. And then the second piece is the color temperature, and these numbers are always a little bit confusing for people who aren't familiar with this metric, which it describes how warm or cool the light is. So 3000 Kelvin is very similar to a typical incandescent light source. It's what's described as a warm white. It's actually even maybe a little bit cooler than a standard incandescent, but it's very close. And 4000 is more of a neutral sort of white color. And again, typically with LED luminaires especially, as well as fluorescents, higher color temperatures are a little bit more efficient. But typically what people want to see in their homes in most cases are those warmer color temperatures, and that's why we chose those requirements. Again, we really want people to like the lighting that is installed. We don't want it to just be the most efficient thing and not very high quality. Yep. So that's really where those standards are coming from. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think, yeah, and then some. And I know, like, we've specified these requirements as part of the CAHP lighting credit, so that, like you said, folks are specifying lamps that will be nice enough to the eye that folks won't just go and then change them out afterwards.
Right. And the nice thing is now with the new standards, they will be labeled, so it'll be really easy to find the lamps that comply with the standards.
Yep.
As opposed to having to read the little lighting facts label on the box or on the product information.
Great. So I think let's keep going, and I'll just remind folks. Great. So the last portion of our presentation will go into the CAHP lighting credit, so you can learn about incentives to start doing this now, to start including these lighting specifications in your homes now before the code goes into effect. So David, back to you.
Great. So one of the other things that we wanted to touch on today is really thinking beyond just the basics of the standards. As I mentioned, the standards are phrased as mandatory standards, but they do provide some flexibility. And we really encourage people to think, when specifying lighting or designing lighting for residential applications, we really encourage people to think beyond a sort of checklist mentality and think about how people are going to be using light in their homes, thinking about lighting for the occupants and not just meeting the standards. And of course, where possible, we always encourage people to make choices to maximize energy efficiency. So choosing the most efficient luminaires if you have, a few options, and then using controls where they'll be effective. And the standards are sort of a baseline, and we can always go farther. And so we wanted to present some thoughts to sort of get that idea in everyone's minds and ways that we can sort of take it to the next level. So one of the big options that you have within the standards is some flexibility with controls. There's obviously the minimum requirements in specific spaces and requirements for dimmers or vacancy sensors on certain luminaires, but we can always go above and beyond that. And we really one of the things that I would like to encourage is providing more uniform controls options for all the lighting in a space. If you have multiple fixtures in your bathroom, obviously at least one of those luminaires has to be controlled by a vacancy sensor, but you could always control all of them with vacancy sensors so that the homeowners or the occupants aren't confused by all of the different sort of controls, and that some are on vacancy sensors and some aren't. And of course, you can consider using vacancy sensors or dimmers even when they're not required. And one of the good things to think about, especially in spaces like bathrooms or anywhere where safety is a concern or where there might be internal barriers, there are ultrasonic or dual technology vacancy sensors that sort of help alleviate some of these concerns where the vacancy sensor might not be able to see you. These technology sensors are able to sort of, they use different sort of technology rather than infrared. The ultrasonic, for example, uses sound waves to sort of sense movement within the space. And then dual technology combines both of those into a single sensor to maximize the effectiveness of those sensors to make sure that it's sensing when there is someone in those spaces. So those can really help with concerns about, lights turning off even if you're still in the room, or if you have a vacancy sensor in your bathroom and it can't see you in the shower, those can sort of deal with those concerns and help implement controls more consistently. And the other piece here is getting back to that color discussion we were having earlier, is to choose luminaires carefully. The JA8 standards are designed to help ensure quality for LED luminaires, but it's really important to consider performance attributes when you're choosing your luminaires. CRI is not a guarantee that it's going to be a great lamp or a luminaire. So one of the things that I always suggest is reviewing samples of luminaires to ensure that they're getting the desired performance that you want. You can get, very similar lamps or very similar luminaires that have very similar color temperature and very similar CRI, and they will have sometimes remarkably different visual performance when you look at them side by side. So I really recommend, whenever possible, that you review samples of those luminaires to make sure you're getting the performance that you want. And of course, consider product life and warranty when you're making your fixture choices, and all of those sort of factors to make sure that you're getting the best thing. Whenever you have options, make sure you consider all the factors in making those decisions. And finally, as I mentioned, some additional resources. Here are some links. The first one is the Residential Compliance Manual, which I mentioned earlier. This is a really great resource for understanding more about the lighting requirements, and actually all of the requirements in the standards. The compliance manuals are a great resource. And then there are also some links here to the actual energy efficiency standards as well as the reference appendices. And there's some additional notes there about where you can find the residential lighting requirements as well as some of the important tables. And the reference appendices is where you'll find all the JA8 requirements as well. And so that wraps up that part of the presentation. And I want to open it up again for any more questions that people might have.
Oh, I don't see any questions just now, so I'll ask you another question. I know yesterday we were talking about this, David, about your hope that lighting vendors would start to indicate whether their lighting meets the code specifications. Have you already started to see that, or have you been talking with vendors about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to like big box stores, sometimes you'll see it on packages. I know there are some online retailers as well, some other lighting specific retailers that note specifically when the luminaires are Title 24 compliant. I don't want to endorse any specific online retailers, but there are some that if you go and you look at them, you can actually like. When you're looking for LED luminaires, you can set Title 24 compliant as a filter, so you'll only see options that are compliant with the code. And then now that the LED space is really growing a lot, I think we're going to see a lot more of that, especially among some of those online retailers, and hopefully among sort of the bigger vendors and suppliers that supply to the larger home builders as well.
Great. And let's just do, I think, one question now, and then I want to make sure we have enough time for our next panelist. So you mentioned that as part of the code enhancement kind of research process that you evaluate the cost effectiveness of new requirements. Can you talk to how you expect these new changes to impact the cost for folks that are building these homes?
Yeah, I mean, when we looked at especially specifically looking at the cost for the all high efficacy requirement, our assumption was that really the easiest way to comply is using a screw-based lamp in a screw-based luminaire. So it really makes the added cost much less. Obviously, LED light bulbs, LED lamps are more expensive than your standard incandescent lamp, but the sort of increase in cost is much less than the increase in cost of going from a screw-based luminaire to an integral LED luminaire. So in most cases, except for downlights where you have to use some sort of LED integral luminaire or sort of a pin base with an LED lamp, if you go from a screw-based fixture with an incandescent light bulb to a screw-based luminaire with an LED bulb, the incremental cost of that change is really only a few dollars compared to what could be tens or more dollars to go to an LED integral luminaire. So really allowing those screw-based LED lamps is really a huge factor in what helps with the cost effectiveness on this measure.
Awesome. I think that hopefully definitely answered the question.
Yeah, it's not. I don't remember the specific numbers off the top of my head, but it makes it very, very cost effective.
Yes. And I guess you're probably also thinking about the life cycle of for the end user as well, not having to replace that.
Yeah, exactly. The LED lamps last much longer than a standard incandescent as well, which helps with the cost effectiveness also. And again, we're looking at it over a 30-year lifespan of a fixture, even though we are considering those replacement costs for the lamps.
Yep. And costs for LEDs are also decreasing as they gain more recognition.
Yeah, that helps a lot too.
Yep. Okay, so let's segue, and I'd like to introduce our next panelist, who is Scott Blunk, who is the new California Advanced Homes Program Manager in PG&E territory. So he is an expert trainer himself, and will be talking about the CAHP lighting credit and make some recommendations for you. So Scott, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Shannon. Everything, I sound okay?
You sound great.
All right, great. Thank you, David, too. Good presentation. So my presentation is really pretty simple. If you do what David said, you get money. Like, that's kind of the whole thing. I'll recap it real quick. There are guidelines of what has to happen, but in CAHP, if you're building currently, so in this code cycle, if you do the next code cycle's lighting requirements, what David just told you, we'll give you $300 to $600 more per unit. So that's kind of the way it works out. But why don't we just go through the slides, and I'll add some things to David. So thanks, David. So there is a lighting cap sheet. So really taking this credit is about learning the code for next year. So there is a lighting cap sheet that's on the website now. That's the CAHP website. And really what we're trying to do is we're trying to help you learn how to design and install and certify this new lighting before it becomes a requirement. I mean, I definitely think the lighting improvement is better, or the lighting changes are better. It's an improvement to, and will make it easier. But there's always any change is difficult, right? So there's going to be a little extra learning going on, but we're here to kind of help pay for that now, so that when you get into the actually new code in January, like lighting, something you already got figured out, and you don't have to worry about it, because there's other things in the new code you got to figure out too. And really, like, there's so many things here that can be said, you know, but the more efficient lighting over an incandescent, just kind of wrapped up that conversation. You know, the payback period is usually months to go to get rid of your incandescent, going to an LED or a CFL. CFL for sure is months, and LED maybe up to a year before it pays itself back. The calculations are really simple. It's don't wait till all your bulbs burn out to replace them in your existing building. But yeah, this is about the new construction. So yeah, the real benefits here is just we're going to help improve the flow from the 2013 code to the 2016 code that's going into effect in January. And then you can, in January, or once you've got lighting figured out, you can focus on the walls and attics, which are the harder thing to adjust to. All right, next page. So, you know, this is about the lighting, the CAHP lighting credit. So some of this feels very much like a recap of what David said, and it is really, because that's what we're hoping you'll do, to take this credit early and learn on our dime, so to speak. So just all permanently installed lighting fixtures must be high efficacy. Eligible LED screw-based lamps considered to be high efficacy, as David was saying, the whole JA8 requirements. And there's a JA8 and there's a JA8-E requirement, and the E is for enclosed fixtures. So if you do the all high efficacy fixtures, you'll get an additional bonus of 3 points on your CAHP score, which depends on where you're at on the curve, your incentive curve, but you'll get between $300 and $600 per house. So it's a nice little bonus. Go ahead. Next slide. Yeah. So all screw-based lighting must be Energy Star certified. The color temperature is between 2,700 and 3,000. The color rendering index greater than 90, and dimmable. So as you'll remember from what David just said, basically this is the same requirement as the code. The color temperatures, really LED LEDs especially, there's so many more choices than there ever were with incandescents. It really takes a little trial and error. The lower temperatures are usually better for rooms that you want to be more mellow in, and the higher temperatures are when you want to be more awake. There's a lot of studies about temperature, and temperature, the color temperatures is really a big deal. So like in my house, I have the 2700 Kelvin in my bedroom because I'm usually there to go to sleep, and I have like the 3000 in my kitchen because when I'm there I want to be awake. So that's kind of, playing around with that is pretty fun, but it is a little challenging and it takes some time to get used to it. So anyway, next slide. So the next three slides are kind of who has to do what as part of getting this credit. And so the builder, they must affirm that 100% of the installed lighting is high efficacy per the 2016 code, and which at the same time is confirming that, or affirming that 0% of the installed lighting is low efficacy. All screw-based luminaires are controlled by dimmer occupancy sensor. Again, those kind of all say the same thing, just that you have to follow 2016 code. Next slide. So the energy consultant, they would select a credit in Energy Pro or CBEC Res, and they would provide a lighting schedule. It doesn't have to be this fancy of a lighting schedule, but some sort of lighting schedule that's showing what permanently installed lighting fixtures go where in the house, something that can be kind of verified by our plan reviewers. Next slide. And in the HERS rater, they will just confirm that the homes that they inspect have no low efficacy lamps. And then of course we conduct our own QC inspection on a sample, but the HERS rater really is just going, the houses that they see, they just have to confirm that they have seen no low efficacy lamps. That's all. Next slide. And that's it. Any questions?
I actually have a question before we get to it. So if folks aren't taking the lighting credit and they would like to, say, if they're already enrolled in CAHP and they haven't specified the lighting credit but they plan to install high-efficacy lighting, what should they do to incorporate that into their scope of work?
Well, in terms of what we need on our end to pay for the incentive, yes, if they're already enrolled in CAHP, but they would like to make this a part of their buildings before the new code, like I said, to kind of learn how to do it before the new code rolls into effect, then they're going to work with their designers and the energy consultants, but certainly keep us in the loop. We want to know that you're making a change before you change it so that we can track it in our documentation, and so that in the end we actually get the money to you as you want, and we want to do it right too. So certainly keep us in the loop that this is something you want to do so that we can note it in our records. And
they should just email, we'll have the contact info page next, yes, but they should just email like the CAHP at TRC Solutions email and let us know.
Yes, that'd be fine.
Great. Cool. Okay, so got kind of a mix of questions for Scott and David. So here's a David question, unless Scott, you want to take it. So can you just reiterate what constitutes an enclosed fixture? You were talking about the JA8 2016E, I think. You'll correct me if I didn't say it right.
Yeah, so anything that is any luminaire that is like things like those globe luminaires that go on your ceiling that are sort of fully enclosed, jelly jar type fixtures, any other type of fixture that is that's fully
like
enclosed where there's some sconces are probably open, but yeah, anything that doesn't allow for airflow through the fixture is going to be an enclosed fixture and should use the JAE type lamp to make sure that it's capable of compensating for all the extra heat within that fixture.
Great.
I know that wasn't very specific, but
I think we know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's all about high heat. That's what the E is for.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's my Scott question. So from the HERS rater perspective, just verifying the lighting in the field, how do they check that it is meets that JA8 requirement? Do they visually have to see some kind of specification?
Well, I think I'm not at this point. I mean, we would want to see the JA8 stamped on the bulb if it's a screw-based. Otherwise, if it's a pin-based, it's kind of visually obvious whether it's a CFL. All the HERS raters know that. The JA8 may not be stamped on everything at this point, but that's why really the lighting schedule comes into play, where if there's a lighting schedule, and the lighting schedule, we as a program have reviewed it, and we know that it is compliant, then the HERS rater should really just go through and check that the fixture matches what's on the schedule. It's really the easiest way to do it.
Perfect. Okay, I actually don't see any more questions, so I'll give folks another minute or so, and while we're waiting for questions, I'll just remind folks, actually we can go to the next slide, and I just want to let you know there's going to be a little survey that pops up when you close out of the webinar, and we just ask things like, did you feel, basically we just want to know if you felt like this was a informative presentation, and also we're curious to know if there's any other topics that you're interested in learning more about. We've done quite a few presentations over the past couple of years on specifically preparing for the code. So there's one we did on higher value walls, ducts and condition space, kind of high performance attics. And I think the next one we want to do is going to be on the Title 24 domestic hot water updates and HERS tests. So we have to schedule that one still, but I think that's the next one we have. But if there's any topics that you're really interested in, we might be able to work them into the schedule. So I think we can wrap up because I don't see any other questions, and I just think you guys both did such a great job and were really thorough, and that must be why we don't have so many questions. So let's wind it down, and again, thanks to our panelists, David and Scott, for presenting, and thanks to all of you who took some time out of your lunch and met with us, and we're glad that you're interested in this topic. So we'll send out the recording of this as a YouTube link, and we'll also send you the slide deck so that you can access this, and we'll note where you can find these other trainings. They're all on our YouTube channel, and the slide decks are all on our website, so you can get those. So have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, and thanks all for attending, and just remember, call with questions. There's also the California Lighting Technology Center that you can call or email with questions. But bring us your buildings. We want to get them enrolled in either the single-family new construction program or the multifamily. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.